This week on The Record, do you trust American elections? Do you have suspicions or questions? We go in depth with top election authorities in Illinois and Missouri to pull back the curtain on how the votes are cast, collected, and counted. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. The single biggest question hovering over this upcoming election and the 2020 election isn't the policies proposed by the presidential candidates, but rather, can we trust the outcome? Do you trust local election authorities spread all across all 50 states, often at the county level, to run a smooth election, to register valid voters, to print accurate ballots, to collect and count them correctly? If not, what specifically makes you skeptical? Maybe we can answer those questions. After all, American trust in elections is at an all-time low, and to be fair, parties on the losing side of elections have expressed concerns, albeit in different manners, over the years. So let's see if we can't get to the bottom of all these doubts and suspicions. We recently traveled to a small strip mall in Springfield, Illinois, the central nervous system for Illinois' election data, the Illinois State Board of Elections. Illinois always has had kind of a reputation. Go back to the election of 1960 in Chicago. Go back to the elections in the 1930s and 40 at the local level in Chicago. Can dead people vote?
Yes, yes.
You've heard these stories.
Right.
Did it take a turn at some point where those sort of jokes took more root?
Well, I think those legends obviously had been around for a long time. And over time, they sort of became, almost a humorous, kind of perversely funny wisecracks about Chicago and the Chicago way and the Chicago machine and all this. And I always remind people, look, whatever happened in 1960, that was 64 years ago. We're in a new era now. You're not, the jokes about dead people voting have now, in a way, kind of morphed into complaints from people that we've got dead people on our voter rolls.
Mm-hmm. Which has happened before.
Well, it has happened, but we also...
How does the state catch that? And how does the state scrub any of those non-valid voters or their names from the rolls?
Well, under the National Voter Registration Act, all states are required to follow certain voter list maintenance procedures, and obviously Illinois is in compliance with that.
Some states do it differently, though.
But it can vary state to state. Now, Illinois, probably the greatest tool that we have in Illinois is we are members of ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Service. I'm sorry, Mark, it's the Electronic Registration Information Center. That's a consortium of a couple dozen states that share voter information across state lines. It shares drivers' motor vehicle information. It shares more information on voters than would be available to any single state attempting to verify voters that may have moved out of the state, may still have inactive registrations in another state, or may have an inactive registration in Illinois that needs to be removed because they've registered in another state.
It's a one-stop shop. It's a place where you've got all this information we can quickly identify. Does the Board of Elections or do local election authorities also communicate with coroners?
They communicate with the Illinois Department of Public Health. We have Social Security records that are available through our own electronic voter database that we maintain here.
So when someone dies, how long until their name is taken off the voter rolls?
I don't know precisely. It really depends on when the jurisdiction is conducting its voter list maintenance.
And part of the reason I'm asking questions in this manner is because I want to help people understand, oh, this is how it works. And I think once people turn their eyes onto that, there's a little bit more understanding. And people are entitled to be skeptical, but they're not entitled to make up their own facts, right? So that's kind of where I'm trying to assuage some of these concerns out there. Something changed in 2020.
Right.
Where states across the country said we've got to do everything we can to make sure people can still vote during this pandemic. One of those big trends was the ballot drop box. Mm-hmm. Why should skeptical voters trust an unattended ballot drop box, that's a safe system?
The ballot drop boxes are subject to security measures, and we were tasked with providing guidance to local election authorities when they purchase those drop boxes, on their installation, on their monitoring.
Monitoring?
Monitoring as in, a lot of them are camera monitored, where there is security footage. These drop boxes were only made by a couple of companies. They've been in use in some of the states where they do only vote by mail. You're talking about Colorado, Washington State, and certain other places.
But I think the concern some people have, when I go to vote, there's a person across from me, signing me in, registering me. There's human contact. Mm-hmm. You trust that a bit more than you do just some box on a street corner.
Well, the vote by mail, the drop boxes, by law, have to be emptied every morning for any overnight drops and at the close of each day. There are security standards for them that make them virtually impermeable to break-ins or vandalism, that sort of thing.
And there's a chain of custody between the transfer?
Correct. Now, the drop boxes were brought about because people had concerns about putting their vote by mail ballots into the mail system. So this gave them an alternative that, right there at your county clerk's office, you are putting it in, no one else is handling it until the employees of your election authority come and empty those ballots every morning and every evening. The other thing is that the local election authorities have given their voters the ability to check the status of their vote by mail ballot. So once you've put that ballot in the mail or dropped it off in the drop box, or in some cases delivered it in person to your election authority, you can then check the status. Generally, you can do that online using your, typically it would be the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, but you're given a means of checking on the status of your ballot. Illinois law also requires that if there's a problem with your mail ballot, like you forgot to sign it, you didn't properly seal the security envelope before you put it in the mail, or if there's concern about your signature not matching the signature that's on record, your local election authority has 48 hours to notify you that there is a problem with your ballot. You're going to need to correct it. Here are the ways that you can correct it. If it's, let's say this is the day before Election Day on a Monday, your only means of correcting it might be you can come in person and vote early, or you can go on Election Day to your polling place. But there are a lot of ways that you can follow your ballot from the time you put it into the mail or put it into that drop box to when it's picked up and processed, to when it's voted and recorded.
Illinois, Governor Pritzker has said Illinois is going to be a welcoming state. And Republicans have hammered him recently for a lot of the state spending on migrant programs. There's been a lot of migrants, a lot of headlines around the migrants bust from Texas and elsewhere to Chicago and to parts of Illinois. Then there's the chatter from people who say, oh, well, and a lot of these fall into Republican circles who say, oh, well, they're just trying to beef up their voter rolls. Let's get into some of that. Mm-hmm. Can an undocumented migrant vote in Illinois?
No.
Why not?
In Illinois, you must, like in every other state in the nation, very first requirement to vote, you must be a citizen of the United States.
And to register to vote in Illinois, you have to have an ID.
Well, you have to have 2 pieces of ID to register to vote in Illinois. You have to prove your identity. You have to prove your residence. Now, once you fill out your application, your local election authority can take other steps to verify that that is in fact you and that your address is in fact valid.
But a non-citizen, a migrant, can get an ID in Illinois.
A non-citizen,
a certain type of ID,
can get an ID. They can't register to vote. Now, this is federal law. You cannot have a proof of citizenship requirement as part of the voter registration process. Other states have tried this. It's been knocked down in federal court before. And the reason for that is that it's deemed as too high a burden for a simple voter registration to demand that someone bring in their birth certificate, something that shows.
It's a barrier to voting.
Correct.
For citizens.
Correct. And I think what we've seen in Illinois, people now are needing to go in and get their real ID driver's licenses, because pretty soon you're not going to be able to fly on an airplane in the United States if you don't have.
Well, they've said that since the Bush administration.
It's been pushed back. Now it seems to be there, and I think a lot of people are taking that seriously. But that process has probably alerted a lot of people to, hey, I don't have my birth certificate. Where is my birth certificate? Where is my Social Security card? Getting those documents together can be burdensome. And federal courts have consistently said that that's too high a burden, too great a burden to place on voter registration. However, the first act when you register to vote is you have to sign an attestation under the penalty of perjury. I am 18 years old. I am a citizen of the United States.
And people who commit fraud on that, migrants or undocumented migrants who commit fraud on that, are deported. In the rare cases when that's been caught or detected, that's a swift deportation penalty, and we've seen some instances of those, and those votes are not counted.
It's instant deportation is the penalty. That there are so many disincentives to an undocumented person going into a government office, providing a legitimate address where they actually live, because in order to verify your voting, you need to receive that voter registration card.
I think you might have just hit the nail on the head with the first comment there, is that a lot of people that aren't documented, the last place they might want to be is in a government office. Right. Just for that very nature, unless they're trying to become a citizen of some kind.
Well, and the other thing is that anyone who is not a citizen and is in this country, whether you're here on a green card, on any other kind of visa, whether you're undocumented, if you ever aspire to citizenship, the first thing that's going to be checked is, did this person register to vote? Did this person vote? If either of those are yes, that's instant deportation. And for someone who is here on, say, a green card, when they go to renew that, that's always going to be checked. If you renew a visa, it's always going to be checked whether you have registered, and especially if you voted. That's very problematic.
One of the big stories that was just starting to unfold right before the pandemic hit, and I think a lot of people forgot about it, was that under the old Secretary of State, for a brief moment there in 2019, the state of Illinois sent notices out to non-citizens. Right. And encourage them to register to vote. Or when they went to go sign in for their ID through this automatic voter registration, they were accidentally registered to vote. There was some snag in the system there. So that raised some alarm bells and it raised some concern. Let me ask you this question. For anybody out there who wonders, they see all the migrants arriving in Illinois. They see the big state cost, about $1 billion in total, providing health insurance or shelter or whatever else. If those people have legitimate concerns and they say, what is Illinois doing? What steps is Illinois taking to detect any example of a non-citizen trying to register to vote, intentionally or otherwise? What steps is Illinois taking? Okay,
first, to go back to the 2019 incident with the automatic voter registration. What happened in that case was, in the first step of automatic voter registration, you fill out this, you make the same attestation that you would make if you're registering to vote in person. I am a citizen of the United States. I am eligible to vote. I am 18 years old. If you check no on that box, the process of automatic voter registration stops. The driver's license process continues. What had happened then was there were I think there were 574 cases in which the applicant had checked no, but the automatic voter registration process continued, those were forwarded to us, and they were forwarded on to local elections.
Something in that hand-signed device, the software glitched, and it sent them into the wrong pool of people.
They should have been, when they checked no, they should have instantly been stopped from the automatic voter registration process.
I think only a couple of them voted. 8 of them, something like that, or a small number.
I believe one was recorded as having actually voted.
The other, okay.
Possibly 2. There was some dispute about this because those voters, they were not able to, the local election authorities were never able to contact them. The biggest problem...
That software glitch was fixed.
That software glitch
years
was
ago.
Fixed. The biggest concern when that happened was that some of those people would have received legitimate voter cards
from the government saying, here, vote here.
So they would have had no reason to believe that they were doing anything wrong. And that, the main concern on the part of the Secretary of State was, we don't want to cause disaster for their immigration status.
Invited them to be deported, right?
Yeah, so that was very important. Now, one other thing that was found when we went through these applications was many of them actually were people who had prior voting records. They were United States citizens. They were already registered voters in Illinois. For some reason, they had made a mistake and checked no. We suspect maybe it was because they were saying, no, I don't need to I don't need to update my voter registration. But a good number of those, of the people on that list had previously, they were legitimate Illinois voters, and we don't know why they checked no.
So this whole example is just one reason to say sometimes human error happens, sometimes software glitches happen. What I'd like to learn more about, and I think what some of our viewers want to know more about, is where are the fail-safes? Where are the pieces of detection? So I'll ask the question again. What steps is Illinois taking to make sure no non-citizen votes?
We at the state board provide our local election authorities with a database, the Illinois Voter Registration System, that has tools such as a connection to the Social Security database, the federal database. Any new registration that provides a Social Security number can be checked against that. You can check death records against that. That's all available to local election authorities. They use it every single day as they vet and do their routine voter list maintenance. The other thing is that Illinois is statutorily required to be part of ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. That puts us into a network with a couple dozen other states where we share information on motor vehicle registrations, on deaths, on voter registrations in other states, on potential double voting from people who may have registration active in Illinois and in another state and may have voted twice. Local election authorities have the ability to check there, and they can check that, and that can be prosecuted.
Only if that other state is participating. Missouri pulled out of ERIC.
Correct. And this has been one of the great ironies of the whole, of the fallout from 2020, of all the discussion about wide-scale election fraud. I think one of the biggest ironies that I've seen is that I'm also the Freedom of Information Act officer here at the State Board. So
you've been busy after 2020.
Correct. I field all kinds of requests from voters who want to know records and all kinds of things related to keeping the voter rolls clean in Illinois.
They don't trust the election was fair. They're skeptical of the process, and they want to see evidence.
The same people who were inundating me with Freedom of Information requests on that topic are the same ones who suddenly, at some point in 2022, somewhere in there, started demanding that Illinois pull out of ERIC. This has happened in a lot of other states.
What would happen? What would be the consequence if Illinois did that?
We would lose what we consider to be the best, most efficient, most effective tool for maintaining clean voter lists in all 108 of our local election authorities. There is no other system that gives you access to this type of network of shared information than ERIC. And even states like Ohio that have pulled out, you've had office holders there who have said, look, we never intended for this to be a consequence. Mm-hmm. This is the opposite. ERIC is a safeguard against inaccurate voter rolls. And now it's being used as just the opposite. Much of the reason for that is because part of the ERIC system is that in August of even-numbered years, ERIC provides election authorities like the Boards of Election, the Illinois State Board of Elections, with a list of eligible but unregistered voters. Those are voters who, through ERIC's records, it has ascertained that they are 18, they are U.S. citizens, but they're not registered to vote.
Right. Missouri's Secretary of State has said the state shouldn't have any interest in encouraging those unregistered voters to register.
Well, that is a policy decision that the Missouri Secretary of State can make. But that's one of the things that has fueled the anti-ERIC sentiment. Now, all those postcards do is say, we have information that you are not registered to vote, you may be eligible. If you are a U.S. citizen, if you are a resident at this address, if you are 18 years old, you can register to vote.
It's a polite nudge.
It's just reminding them that this is available. It's not something where we are going out and automatically registering people.
Well, Illinois does that too.
We do that in the driver's license facilities and in certain other state agencies to make it more convenient, to get more people involved in the voting process.
It stands to reason that a state should take an interest in encouraging voter turnout and democratic participation.
Well, that has been the guidance that we've received from the Illinois General Assembly. Mm-hmm. That's what we go by.
My last set of questions here is about the incident in 2016. Mm-hmm. National press took an interest, and people across the country wanted to know more about why Russian hackers would have any interest in this little building in the middle of a strip mall. Well, it's because there's some sensitive data here. If the voter rolls are so important to keep clean, and they're so important to keep precise, what is the risk, what is the danger of an adversary getting a hold of it?
Well, number one, what happened in 2016, it almost feels like ancient history to us here now because so much changed after that. So much changed here with how we handle our data. We now have an entire new division of information security.
And maybe it would be helpful to just interject that while the belief is that Russian hackers may have gained access, there was never any evidence that they manipulated or changed any data in the rolls, and certainly not in the results.
They were unable to.
And those are two different things, by the way.
Correct. What they got were encrypted pieces of voter registrations. You may have had a street number here, a zip code there, a first name. It was not complete, nicely legible voter cards with all your information on it.
The door was cracked open, but they didn't get all the way inside.
Right, and they didn't get into an area where they would have been able to change anything. They attempted to and were unsuccessful. Now, we always are quick to point out that that happened in July of 2016. There were no adverse effects on the subsequent November 2016 election. The Attorney General set up a hotline. We notified some 70,000 voters that their data may have been compromised. If they saw any unusual activity with their personal information, they could call this hotline. No one did. But it did alert us to the fact that there is this effort to break in. And even though they were not able to do any damage, to do any manipulation of voter registrations, the public perception was, hey, that's my voter information there.
The seeds of doubt were planted.
Yes. And so the perception is one thing that we really, really have to make sure that we guard against any damage to. We don't want the public having any reason to doubt the integrity of any part of the election system.
And so one of the reasons I wanted to highlight that crystal clear distinction between the results and the voter rolls, a lot of people assume hacking, they think, oh, they're going to try to switch the results. Those are housed internally, those machines are not connected to the internet, totally a different process. But the rolls, again, what would an adversary want with the voter rolls? What kind of chaos could they imagine on that front?
Well, number one, oops, did you want to
answer that question?
Okay.
At the advice of counsel.
Love-hate relationship, disliked.
I just hate it. But he loves the way it makes you look. I promise this was the last question, too.
Okay.
Sure it was. All right, I'm going.
Doug just decided he wanted to give you a lot of time to really prepare the answer.
Yeah, I know, I'm thinking of it. I'm just working up.
Do we want... Well, it's up to you. I guess I was going to say we could just do it without the light. And then...
Let me just add this. This guy will work.
Okay.
All right.
I'll just restate the question as soon as he gives me the green light. We didn't even get into that either. Facebook, social media stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I was going to, because I was going to bring up that.
Go, yeah.
Okay.
Well, then maybe I have a second question after this. Okay. There's the difference in roles and results. What would an adversary want with accessing the voter rolls?
Well, in the case of Russia, in this case, where we know the U.S. Department of Justice identified one Russian military official who was responsible for what happened here. The intent would be simply to sow chaos, to undermine American confidence in what is the foundational aspect of our democracy, right? It's our election system.
Well, if that's what they want, haven't they gotten it?
In a sense, they have to what we believe is a very vocal minority. We still think that anyone who harbors any skepticism about election integrity is going to be brought back in. Because remember, prior to 2016, you didn't have these doubts. You didn't have these questions that elections were rigged. You didn't have allegations that there was widespread fraud, hundreds of thousands of votes being changed.
I don't know. In 2000, I mean, there's certainly, anytime there's a close election, people start to kind of sound some alarms.
2000 was different because it was so procedural. It was pertaining to one state and one process there. This was different. This was a wholesale, unfounded allegation of widespread voter fraud in which no evidence was presented. That's one of the problems that we and election authorities across the country and your local county clerk have had ever since this issue came up. These allegations are made. There is no credible evidence presented. There is nothing that we can present evidence to refute. We continue to send out the message that, look, here is the testing we do of these machines. At the State Board of Elections, before any system can go into use in Illinois, it has to pass federal testing. Then it comes to us, it has to pass our own state testing. Then, once a local election authority installs a system, it has to do public testing prior to every election.
That's the part I don't think most people know. So for anybody who's watching this extended interview, if they're really curious and they just really want to know, I've got to see this for myself, they might not know there's a show and tell in their backyard or in their home county. What does that look like? what should they do? If there's a person who still says, you know what, I watched this interview, I've still got questions, what should they do?
Find out from your local election authority when they are doing their pre-election testing. That'll be done no less than 5 days prior to an election. Find out when they're doing it. You can go to the office. Now, be aware too that any candidate who's on the ballot is probably going to be there at that testing. The members, the representatives of the parties in that county or in that congressional district or whatever the district may be.
They have a vested interest in making sure they work, right?
As the election authority, the election officials show that all of these different ballot styles that will be fed through this tabulator, that will be serving all these precincts, they are counting every single vote precisely. That's the main thing that we can present to the voting public, to reassure them that your votes are counted correctly. Every single ballot in Illinois that is handed to a voter, number one, there is a paper record of that ballot, whether it's the ballot itself or whether it is a receipt from a tabulator. If we need to rerun an entire election the day after the election, we've got the stacks of paper to do that. We could rerun them.
One of the things that strikes me about this conversation with you is just your sense of resolve, like your sense of, you must have seen 1,000 different types of questions or complaints or concerns in your job with maybe more than 1,000. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen something that shook your confidence?
Everyone involved in elections in Illinois. We have 108 local election authorities. They have dozens and dozens of employees. And here at the state board, everyone is committed to the precision of the voting process, from registration and validation of registrations and keeping clean voter rolls right on up to the voting process itself and the tabulation of those results. Everyone.
Are you saying that, yeah, I've seen questions, but I've also seen the answers?
I know how hard everyone works to make sure that none of the things that are causing these unfounded suspicions ever happen. And it's a message that we try over and over and over again to get across to voters. I spent an entire day in September of 2023 with a couple dozen downstate Illinois county clerks and election officials doing a series of sort of barnstorming press conferences. The message was from those clerks, listen to our voters. We are your neighbors. Our kids go to the same schools that your kids go to. If you have any suspicion about the election system, come directly to us. We're happy to talk to you. We're happy to show you what we do. We're happy to show you why some of these wild allegations are not true. They were doing this in the fall of 2023 because it was well ahead of the height of the primary season. They wanted to get ahead of any rumors that they knew would be coming.
You can no longer just play defense.
You have to get out ahead of this. These local election authorities, too, were dealing with an additional aspect of it, which is because they are the ones who have to staff their polling places. They have to recruit their election judges. They've seen that job get more difficult because you have now poll watchers who are more aggressive than they had been in the past, who come in with a preconceived notion that they're going to ferret out fraud there in the polling place. You have voters coming in with, at times, a very combative attitude that everything that's being done is some evidence of fraud. And a lot of the election judges have decided that that's just not an atmosphere that they want to work in anymore. So what these county clerks were trying to do was get ahead of it, get a message to people in their communities that, hey, we are your neighbors. We will show you why these rumors are unfounded. That's been something that I was really happy to be part of it. I was glad they invited me to be along, although in my opinion, they're the ones who do the real work on Election Day. We're kind of the background support for them. But that really was an indication of how the atmosphere out there is really reaching down to, you know, the very ground floor of elections. And you have people saying, you need to trust us at some point. We will show you why you should trust us. We're not asking you to do it on blind faith.
If you've been there to vote, you've probably seen they have a poll book. They can flip through and find your name and your address. They have an electronic poll book, too, in many cases, where they can go through and look at that. Would it make their job easier if next to the name and address of each registered voter was a photo ID of them, too? Illinois doesn't require that photo ID, but if you have to have an ID to vote, it stands to reason the state has your mug shot. They've got your picture there somewhere. How hard would it be to just plug that picture in and give an extra layer of confidence?
That's a question that you'd have to ask to the leaders of the Illinois General Assembly. They're the ones who amend the Illinois election code. They would be the ones, if they saw a need for a photo ID law in Illinois, they could enact it. That's not a question, that's a policy question that we just don't address at the state board. If it becomes law, we will assist in implementing and enforcing it. But until then, that's a decision for the lawmakers to make.
Matt, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
True transparency in government is often more elusive than it should be. Sometimes prying the truth out of government bureaucracies can be quite a headache, but not at the local election authority that's the largest one in the state of Missouri. There, an open door policy really does swing both ways. Democrats and Republicans both go in and out of locked doors together, and they work on a bipartisan basis to safeguard the changing of the guard, if you will. We sat down with Eric Fay and Rick Stream, the Democrat and Republican running the St. Louis County Election Board, to see how they're combating mistrust in elections, one skeptical voter at a time. There are studies that say you're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to commit voter fraud in America. And yet, this question of voter fraud, this big doubt of voter fraud, is still out there. I think 26% of white American voters feel very confident there was mass voter fraud in the last major election. How do you fight that?
Well, I think here in St. Louis County, Missouri, and in Missouri in general, since we have very strict election laws requiring photo IDs, we don't mail ballots out to voters unless they've asked for the ballots. I think we try to create a climate where people have trust in the way we operate here in St. Louis County. We give tours of the place, we show people how we operate, we invite the public in to see all of our operations here, and including the audits that we do after the election when we do hand count audits. So our goal here in St. Louis County is to try to make the public aware of how we operate here in St. Louis County. We can't control what's happening in other counties or certainly other states, but we can control what goes on here. So we bring in a lot of people to see how we operate here in St. Louis County.
I was struck the other day, I was watching this documentary, the turning point, or the Cold War, the turning point between the bomb and the Cold War and all that. And in Eastern Europe, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, all these people were so grateful to finally have a say in the outcome of their government, to finally vote. It was this like earth-shattering discovery they had. And I wonder if that ever occurs to you, if you sit here and think how we cheapen the idea of the vote when we cast so much doubt on it.
Personally, I think before the last few elections, when both sides were saying that the election was stolen or they didn't believe it was fair, people still felt that their vote didn't count sometimes. And it wasn't a matter of voting in a Democratic area and you were a Republican. It was that they just didn't think it would make any difference. There were never any close races, therefore their vote didn't count. And we have discovered here in St. Louis County, especially in the April elections, for the local elections, that 1 or 2 votes will count. We can't force people to vote. We can make sure that if they're an American citizen, they can register, and if they're a registered voter, we make it as easy as possible to vote.
I suppose one of the challenges you might face is that often you're trying to prove something that didn't happen. It's hard enough to prove something that did to a skeptic. How do you go about proving a negative?
Part of proving that, or if that's, I don't even know if that's a good way to describe it, is, when people talk about voter fraud or that they might believe there's voter fraud in elections, our experience has been that fraud in elections is rare, but that it does occur. and that it usually occurs in municipal elections, small elections where the turnout is low. But I think what people can take solace in is that when people do try to cheat, we catch them. We've had a few people prosecuted for voter fraud in St. Louis County in the last several years. And so I think that's important for people to remember, that there are robust checks and balances in place throughout this whole process. And if you try to abuse this process, we're going to catch you.
When Missouri finally implemented the voter ID, and you had to bring that, what was the change that you saw? Did you start to detect more cases of mistaken identity or of potential fraud? What was the finding after the change?
I don't know that we've found anything particularly different after that change.
Did it change turnout at all?
That's not been our experience, that it hasn't affected turnout. I think, you know, what we find, frankly, is photo voter ID law in Missouri has affected two populations of people. The first population of people are folks who leave their IDs at home or in the car, and then they have to fill out a provisional ballot, go back and get their ID. The second population are folks who moved Missouri and don't get a Missouri driver's license before the election. And so if you don't have a Missouri ID or a passport or a military ID, you have to vote a provisional ballot. So it's people that are living in Missouri and have a photo ID, just not a Missouri ID. That's who we see voting provisional ballots because they don't bring ID to the polls.
I've heard other election officials describe this vocal minority of people who don't trust them. And I don't know how to scale that. Are there untold stories of people who come in, do your survey, you do the show and tell, they see all your gear, and there's an aha moment? Are there people who are now believers that maybe were skeptics?
Oh, that's certainly been our experience. That, as Rick mentioned previously, we really enjoy giving tours, and really since 2016, 2020, we have tried to make that a more robust experience and to try to have more groups in. We have community groups in on a very regular basis to give them tours, and almost every time when folks finish the tour here, it's very enlightening. People tend to think, you know, what could be interesting at the election board? It's some, you know, austere government office, and it's really not. I mean, we're sitting out in this warehouse now. There's a lot that goes into elections, and there are a lot of robust, again, security and checks and balances in place. And when people see that with their own eyes, they understand that, you know, if something were to happen or if somebody would try something, the election officials are going to protect them against that.
In all the acrimony, in all the red versus blue, you guys like each other? It seems like you guys get along pretty well.
We do. We're in here. We're in this job to ensure that the people of St. Louis County can vote, and that the elections are fair, honest, that we run them accurately, and without any controversy.
Does it add to the voter confidence or to the general trust that there's a Republican and a Democrat working together? How does that equation boost or amplify voter confidence?
Right. We're one of 6 bipartisan election boards in Missouri, 2 here on St. Louis side, 4 over on the Kansas City side, and I think that goes a long way to convincing people out in the field, out in the public, that a Republican and a Democrat are in every position of these bipartisan boards that manages the ballots and the equipment. I think that really helps tamp down any concern about one side stealing votes or doing something illegal.
I'm trying to imagine what it might look like if Democrats and Republicans work together in a legislature the way you two do here.
That's a good question. I do think, to be fair, it's different in a legislative setting than it is in an administrative setting.
The goals are different. You're there to argue.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're there for policy differences. Rick and I certainly don't agree on much in terms of policy. If he and I were in the legislature together, we'd probably be voting against each other most of the time. But in terms of running an office and administering an election, we want it to run correctly in accordance with the law, and we're in lockstep as far as that goes. So we have the same goal here.
Are there moments where you do see the counterbalance? Is there a natural tension where one of you offsets the other?
I don't think so. I mean, we talk about a lot of things, mainly procedures that we're going to use here, and maybe ideas that we want to get out to the public to encourage more people to vote and vote, you know, in different places. So we talk about a lot of this, and we come to a good consensus on what's the best way to operate.
I guess the last thing I'll leave it is that a lot of younger voters, maybe voters who hadn't gone through the Cold War or conflicts from past, I don't know if there's just less appreciation for engagement. Or has it always been that younger voters just engage the process less? How do you read that?
That's a good question. I'm not a political scientist, but I mean, I think there's a body of academic study there to show that younger people traditionally have not participated at levels in the same way that older voters do necessarily. But, you know, we try to instill confidence in the process here by what we do and by the procedures we put in place. But to some extent, participation is really driven by the competitiveness of the election and by whatever propositions or candidates might be on the ballot. And there's not anything election administrators can do about that.
I think a lot of the lack of interest of young people over the years, and I'm 75, Eric's 40, so we come at it from different areas, and of course we get young people nowadays. I don't think it had anything to do with cynicism. I think it was just they were busy doing other things. I mean, I was the president of Republican clubs at Merrimack and UMSL. It was hard getting people to come out for my clubs as well as the Democrat clubs because the young people were just interested in something else. And, you know, as they got a little older, then they became more interested.
There you go. Well, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Yeah.